On September 27th of 2016, in a 4-to-1 vote, the Pasco County Board of County Commissioners voted to establish an MSBU to purchase the Gulf Harbors Golf Course property. And I have to tell you that when I started going to these meetings, I didn't know what any of the terminology was. I didn't know what an MSBU was. An MSBU is a Municipal Service Benefit Unit, which is created by a Florida county to assess for certain costs of essential and necessary services and improvements. So if they wanted to tax the whole county to do something in a neighborhood, they couldn't justify that. So they come in and they form an MSBU and they tax the people in the neighborhood for the improvements. And I think we're all used to street assessments. If they repave your street, you got to pay for something. They give you 10 years and it goes on your tax bill, and you can't debate it, because if you don't pay the assessment, you're late on your taxes, and they'll file a foreclosure on your home. So it's not a voluntary thing, and it happens, and we all understand it. But that's supposed to be done for essential and necessary services, which can include street lights, road paving, and fire services. And I think we'd all agree a fire department is essential, a paved road is essential, street lights are essential. The services or improvements must benefit a specified local area and are paid for by assessments on property owners in that area. The MSBU assessment is incorporated into your annual county tax bill for each property in the MSBU service area. So now you know what the term MSBU is when we talk about that. Another term we're going to hear later is ELAMP, E-L-A-M-P. And ELAMP stands for Environmental Land Acquisition Management Program. And it's a branch of Pasco County government that allows them to acquire land that's considered environmentally sensitive or for environmental preservation. They can do it for a bird sanctuary, they can do it for drainage and retention, they can do it for other things like that. So we want to make sure that you understand that when you look at some of these documents. After the vote was made for the MSBU to be formed, 2 property owners objected to that. And there were others of us that objected, but we were too busy with our regular lives, so we didn't speak up. We figured, well, that's government being government and has to go the way it's going to go. And those 2 people filed a lawsuit asking the county to stop the purchase, stop the creation of the MSBU, and conduct a new vote of the residents based on a number of factors. Their point was that the ELAMP vote was flawed, and that the golf course purchase as proposed was not beneficial for the property owners in Gulf Harbors. One of those people is here tonight, Diane Coburnick. We'll introduce her later. Is Susan with us this evening? Susan couldn't be here. Susan and Diane met at the courthouse fighting the same fight. They didn't go in there together. They were both, sometimes I think Mitch is lucky, and sometimes I feel sorry for him, because he's got a very assertive wife that decided this was wrong and she wasn't going to roll over or lay down. She showed up at the courthouse to fight it. She met another lady doing the same thing. And Susan worked for a lawyer, so she was a paralegal. So she had expertise to help move this thing through. They filed their lawsuit as private citizens with no legal representation. In spite of their legal challenge, Pasco County is still aggressively continuing with their plan to purchase the Gulf Harbors Golf Course property. And this is one thing you might want to write down if you're not familiar with it. The purchase price proposed is $1.2 million. And you're going to find out tonight there's a lot of coincidences that we think are not quite coincidences. And a lot of accidental omissions that we don't think are quite accidental omissions. Now you decide that for yourself. But sometimes things are too convenient to be accidental. So we want you to remember that figure of $1.2 million. The proposed purchase will be funded by a one-time ELAMP contribution of $600,000. So the county is going to use $600,000 to help purchase a golf course. Guess where they got that from? Well, from us, the penny from Pasco. So it's really tax money that we gave for improvements in Pasco County. They're going to use that, and then an MSBU will be created, assessing all of us for the difference. So $600,000 would come from us. They're going to take it, they say, over a few years. And it really sounded like an inconsequential amount of money. And it's not that I have a lot of money, I just don't have a lot of time. So to fight for $100 a year, take the $100, I got other things to do. But we think there's a whole lot more to that story of what it could cost us over the years. Because an MSBU doesn't only pay for the purchase of the property, it pays for any and all ongoing maintenance, improvements, stormwater management, etc. And later on, you'll hear from another one of our friends here what etc. can mean, and it's really mind-boggling. It's a lot of expense that we could have to pay once the MSBU is in place. And the interesting thing about the MSBU, we'd have no say in it whatsoever. And you'll hear that later, and you'll see documentation on it. This would result in an open-ended obligation for property owners here in our community. The reason we refer to the obligation as open-ended is that if the MSBU is allowed to stand, there is absolutely no cap on what the, or restriction on what the county can do with the property. The MSBU could allow the county to buy the property and it could be a park today. 10 years from now, they could decide it could be something else. And that's their alternative. That's not our decision. The county will have an unrestricted right to do whatever they choose to do, including development or sale, with no input either allowed or required from the property owners assessed to the MSBU. And in an update, everybody remember the vote that the county did by mail? We were told that that had to be done as part of forming the SBU. Diane has challenged that vote and said it wasn't correct. The county has now corrected their position to say that the vote was not necessary or required. It was merely done as a courtesy for the people in this subdivision. Let me tell you a little bit about the property. The Gulf Harbors Golf Course property is approximately 50 acres of land currently owned by a private party, the Springer family, who have owned it for years and been actively trying to sell it for years. The property is encumbered by a number of liens, including but not limited to, and when I tell you about these liens, they're going to seem kind of silly. You're going to say, why would anybody loan this kind of money on a piece of property like that? And the term I want you to remember is real estate speculation. Does everybody remember a time in 2005 or 6 that it seemed like there was no real estate left in Florida? I mean, the prices were going through the roof and you couldn't find a lot and you couldn't find a home. The prices were going up really crazy. So I believe, and here's my opinion, a lot of this, the lending and the other things were done based on real estate speculation of what the property could be and what the land could be worth. But here's the liens that encumber the property right now. And if you have your pad, write these down. Right up at the top, remember 1.2 is the purchase price. There's a lien by the Orsi Trust, which is a group of people that loaned the Springer family money to develop the property in the amount of $400,000 plus $318,000 in accrued interest and approximately $30,000 in property taxes. So the first lien holder on that land is for $748,000. That's going to be an important number later. There's a lien by Prudential Tropical Realty, Dewey Mitchell's company, which was bought by Berkshire Hathaway. A lot of people know Dewey. He grew up here. He went to the Olympics with judo. Great guy. I've known him for years. Not sure about his standing in this business situation right now. Just to tell you, don't have an opinion yet. But there's a lien on the property by his company for $200,000. So you want to write that down. That's the second liability. There's also a lien for an undisclosed amount by a law firm called Hobby and Hobby. An interesting fact is Hobby and Hobby has a lien on the property for an undisclosed amount. They didn't pay doc stamps and it wasn't recorded. There's a lien on the property, but we haven't been able to find out for how much. It could be $100, it could be $100,000, it could be $1 million. We have no idea what Hobby and Hobby is owed, but they are owed money on the property. The final lien is by utility providers, totaling approximately $55,000. The reason I told you that the figures were really interesting is if you add up the money owed, it's almost $1 million. That these guys needed to sell for to get their money back. If it sells for $500,000, guess who doesn't get paid? Everybody at the bottom of the tier. So there's $1 million owed, and what's the purchase price? $1.2 million. It's a coincidence. I don't think. Man, possibly not. My opinion again. The value of the property, everybody knows that property value is determined by appraisals. If you tried to buy a house in the past year or two, you may have experienced making an offer on a house, having the offer accepted, and finding out that the house wasn't appraised. The bank is not going to loan the money because the value is not there. The interesting thing about appraisals is appraisals are often opinions of value. When they become important is when the bank has to justify them for me to buy the house. If this man right here had a house for sale for $100,000 and I offered him $200,000 and he took it, we would have an offer and an acceptance. But no bank is going to loan me $200,000 on a $100,000 house. So the offer would be meaningless. He could tell everybody, I got an offer for $200,000. And I could tell everybody I made an offer for $200,000, but the bank's not going to loan me money. I'm not going to buy the house. It's not a real offer. So remember that later too, because that'll play in also. The property owner commissioned, in 2015, the property owner, the Springer family, commissioned Prudential Tropical Realty, Dewey Mitchell's company, and the lien holder to perform an appraisal on the property, with the appraisal based on the hypothetical assumption. If you want to write anything down, write appraisal, hypothetical assumption, that 90 residential dwelling units could be built on the property. That appraisal came back for $1.7 million. Another great coincidence. 1.7 is more than 1.2. It's a good sale. It makes all the sense in the world. But a hypothetical assumption is that I'll sell you my car based on the hypothetical assumption that it can fly. So I want you to pay $35,000 for my $10,000 car, because hypothetically, what if it could fly? What would it be worth? Well, are you going to pay me $35,000 for a flying car that can't fly? No, but we could justify under a hypothetical assumption that the value is $35,000. So remember that, that's important as well. In the same year, an appraisal of the property was commissioned by Pasco County based on the actual zoning and land use at that time. Now here's what's important. That took that same situation to what year is your car, how many miles, what's it worth? That's the actual value of the car. In this appraisal, in the same year, 2015, the appraisal came back at $275,000. That's a property that we're buying. Everybody get excited. We're buying it for 1.2. And it was $275,000 was the appraisal at the time. Again, but hypothetically, we could build 90 homes and my car could fly. They're both worth a whole lot more. A year later, the same appraiser was given explicit instructions by Pasco County, and these documents were available through a thing called discovery. Because they're fighting Diane's lawsuit, she has the right to see the email chain between the county commissioners, between county employees, between the attorneys. The appraiser was given explicit instructions to perform another appraisal based on the hypothetical assumption that 80 residential dwelling units could be built on the property. Now it came back for $600,000. Again, a property we're going to pay 1.2 for. They managed to move it up to $600,000 through hypothetical assumptions on the property. Just so you know, and Mitchell will explain later, the zoning and the land use doesn't allow that many homes to be built there. But they said, well, pretend they could be built there. What would it be worth if you could build 90 homes there? And my next sentence says, however, Pasco County's own land use and development regulations, and this is important, Pasco County's local mitigation strategy developed for FEMA do not allow for this density of development on the property. Part of that is because of the flood risk in this area. They said enough risk is here, there should be nothing new built in the Gulf Harbors area. And I don't want to steal thunder, but Mitch is going to tell you about another time that they tried to build here and they were shut down. The builder was sent away. But hypothetically, somebody is going to come down and build 90 homes here. Additionally, all three appraisals were made prior to any environmental studies that have identified multiple contaminants exceeding Florida's target cleanup levels from residential areas. I'm in the radio business, and I've had advertisers that have owned property that have contamination. Some of the reasons for contamination can be fuel tanks, oil tanks, kerosene, things like that leak and leach into the soil. When the ground is contaminated, it all has to be hauled away. You can spend $1 million trying to develop a gas station property because the soil is contaminated. Golf courses routinely have contamination because of pesticides and chemicals that are used to keep the greens beautiful. The owner of the course isn't thinking, what's it going to do in 30 years? He's thinking, if the courses aren't green, people aren't going to play, I can't make money. So that's what happens. If there's a cumulative accumulation, maybe that's a